Hi, my name is Evan Thompkins. Being a peer was a life-changing experience for me. I didn't know the impact I would have on the people I worked with or the impact that being a peer would have on me. Um, while I eventually moved on professionally, I've always felt like that since I've been a peer, that's kind of still how I show up in the world. Today, I want to talk about my reflections of being a peer support specialist, what that experience was like, and being kind of part of a multidisciplinary team. To discuss, my experiences as a peer, I kind of wanted to share some of my story, and how I became a peer, in the first place. I've been experiencing mental health concerns since I was 10 years old. I had 10 years where substance use was a major concern in my life. I actually can vividly remember my first experience with depression at 10 years old. There was this movie called Joe Somebody. I think it was like a Tim Allen movie, but I was so excited to go see this movie, um, the like week prior to seeing it, and I was really excited. So some friends and my mom, we got in the car and we went and we saw the movie. And I remember it being good, but what I remember is the drive home and sitting in the car, and everyone else was still kind of happy and having a good time. And I just felt like this overpowering sense of emptiness and isolation. And at 10, I couldn't really understand what this was, but I think it was at that age, it was like I was just kind of living from one dopamine kick to the next. And I remember this cold feeling coming over me as this song Can't Get You Out of My Head by Kylie Minogue started playing, and it just was so uncomfortable. And yeah, I think that was my first experience with depression. My family dynamic growing up, it wasn't great. My parents didn't know how to express their emotions. I lived in a family where everyone kind of just bottled things up, and so people were punished for showing emotions. Um, so by the time I was 11 or 12, I was really struggling, going to school. I was having these crying episodes. Uh, my parents eventually took me to the doctor, and I got on Lexapro, which was a terrible, terrible drug for me, because being a child, I didn't understand, the side effects antidepressants could have. I was just kind of numb and apathetic and really cold to the world. I wasn't having real, real valid emotions anymore. My parents also got me into counseling, which was good, but the counseling I went to, it was like family counseling, but they had split me and my parents up. So this older gentleman, he would talk to my parents for 30 or 40 minutes, and I would just sit in the hallway outside the room, but it was not great because I could just hear everything that was happening um, in the room. So it just felt like I was hearing my parents talk bad about me, and the things I was experiencing. Uh, and so that wasn't great for me. And then I would go in and I would play chess with this man. Um, and then he would just say like some real simple things to me, like, when you're feeling upset, I want you to like count to 10 and take 10 deep breaths. And even at that age, I was just kind of like, no, duh. Like, really, this is what counseling is. So I was kind of burnt out, and thought all counseling was like that at a young age. I remember, talking to my psychiatrist at one point, and back then his next idea for drug options was lithium, but they would have had to test my blood like on a weekly basis, and it just seemed like really extreme, and um, that didn't seem like something I was willing to do. I did try some other, medications, but I remember having this experience in school, and it was almost like one of those teen romance movies in the 90s where the person is walking and everything's a blur and going past them really quick. And I was just, so out of it. But another thing that was going on is at home, when I expressed or showed emotions, my parents viewed that as depression. So my mom would just say, Evan, go take another Lexapro, which is not how those drugs are supposed to be used at all. So I was kind of being over medicated as well. But I think at an early age in my brain, I kind of just learned that how to control my emotions and my response to depression was by um, taking a pill, which led into me in high school, starting to drink and use drugs, to kind of manage my emotions and what I was feeling. Uh, I went to college, and by the time I was in college, my freshman semester, my idea of having a good night was if I blacked out. Like that's what I was trying to do. I was like drinking and doing drugs to try and black out. Like that is how I determined having a good night. And there was a night where I had drank a lot and I was still really upset. And I came back to my dorm room and um, I swallowed a bunch of pills, and then I went and got in the shower, and I passed out in the shower in the dorms. And some guys eventually came in and kind of dragged me back to my futon. Um, and I remember being really out of it for a few days, but that was one of like the first times in my life where this little voice in the back of my head just kind of said like, what are we trying to do here? Like, are you really trying to just have a good time and party, or are you trying to hurt yourself? Um, it was around Thanksgiving at that time too, so I'd went home and I was hanging out with my friends, and I used to tell all these stories about, great parties and partying. So I was telling this story with my best friend there about this night we had all been drinking, and he could always, drink a lot more than me. And I was so proud of myself to have, kept up with him. And at the end of the night, um, after I had quote unquote kept up, we were taking shots in this kind of sandbar parking lot. And I remember getting into my car and my head just kind of slumping against the window and looking out the window at the stars in the night and being like, oh, thank God, my best friend is driving home. And so I had told it in a way that, at the time was kind of like funny and amusing. But after that, my friend kind of pulled me aside and he said, Evan, I didn't drive home that night. You did. And I had always had this air of invincibility around me, like, oh, I can handle what I'm doing. But I think that really concerned me too, being in a place where all I could remember was just like staring at the stars. And I was like, man, I could have really hurt myself or someone else. So that's, when I made this journey of getting into counseling, really trying different medications, working on some substance use concerns over the years. I had this psychiatrist in college, and I remember him, we went through a couple different diagnoses, but I remember him telling me that, Evan, you might think about suicide every day of your life. Like that just might be your norm. And that just really rubbed me the wrong way, because I don't know, I just thought that there was a world so much beyond that. And if that's all that I was shooting for was a place of like maybe having to think of suicide constantly, like it just didn't seem like a life I was wanting to live. Um, And so I worked really hard with different therapies and kind of rewiring my brain, but eventually kind of finding a way and a pathway to overcome a lot of the things I was dealing with. Uh, when I was in college, I studied abroad in South Africa, which is a great experience. But just seeing kind of the suffering some of the people in poverty were experiencing there, I think it really changes you to look at someone else and to actually see them suffering. It's hard to not look at someone and actually see them and not see the humanity in them and being able to kind of reflect and see how their pain is your pain and your pain could be theirs. I think we definitely have a culture of kind of looking away, but that's kind of a whole different other thing. So after that experience, I had graduated college and I decided to get a master's in public health because my thought was I was going to do work overseas. So I finished my master's in public health at Colorado State University, and then I moved to Grand Junction, Colorado, to kind of take care of my grandma and my grandpa as he passed away. And so when my grandpa passed, I was looking for a job that would kind of fit into the schedule, taking care of my grandma. And uh, somehow I was mainly looking for like jobs in like public health, um, but I came across peer support, and the idea just was kind of fascinating to me. Growing up, I lived in this household where emotions weren't expressed. So just anything related to emotional expression and sharing emotions, it was just kind of a taboo, but also it was so fascinating to me. So I applied and I was hired as a peer support specialist. I remember, starting my training as a peer, and we kind of had this like tiny, like it was not a big training manual for the peer support program, and I kind of had this snotty attitude of, well, I have two college degrees. Like, what is this little manual going to teach me that, I couldn't have um, already received? But as I worked through the manual and learned the skills, I really began changing as a person, not just in how I was able to connect with clients I started working with, um, but also I think I just changed at my core. Like being a peer helped me become a more complete person. I formed social skills and emotional skills that I had never had in my life. And I had thought like I had done all this work and moved so far past, my substance use and depression, but now I had all these skills to connect with people in ways that I had never been able to before. And I could finally love the world and help people around me as much as I kind of had always wanted to. Um, So I had this desire to move to Africa and to do public health work there, but having this job, um, it felt like this pathway that I could really get behind. Um, so the company I had worked for, they had a mental health hospital, and then they had a few different buildings that had peers in it. And we were kind of in a newer division of peers that was set up in one of the local hospitals. Um, So what was interesting, I guess, about that is we weren't hospital employees, but we were kind of contracted to be working in the emergency room. So the emergency room had doors kind of over here, and then it had this big circle of rooms around it, a nurse's station, doctor station, social workers there in the middle. The rooms were kind of out on the outside, and then the piers, we had a little computer, and a few chairs just kind of against this wall, um, in this hallway. So, you know, working in this setup, we were, initially learning how to work with doctors and nurses and LSCWs. It was kind of a hard dynamic to be newer and be integrated into this hospital, but at the same time, we almost have to like teach these people who didn't know what peer support was, how they could utilize us. Um, and it was a hard thing, and I definitely experienced some discrimination that I hadn't in my life before, coming from like such a quote unquote professional background. It was the first time I had felt like people had really looked down on me because of like my position and what it was. Like everyone there had degrees, and they kind of just looked at us like, we were these people without degrees and didn't really know what we were doing or talking about. So some people didn't value us as I think we should have been, but also they just didn't know how to use us. So it was definitely a balance of, trying to explain and share and show the value with also not being like pushing too hard of, no, this isn't something we would do. Working with people in the ER, it was such a great experience. Being able to help people in distress and positions that I've been in my life and really connect with them in a real and meaningful way. Um, but I definitely started to notice some of the flaws, I think, of the system we had all bought into of, people coming in. And almost there was this belief of just like going to a mental health hospital on a mental health hold for a few days would just like fix people. And it wasn't just like some of the clients we had worked with. It almost felt like some of the nurses and social workers had this idea of like, let's cycle them in, get them to the mental health hospital, and that's kind of the end of the story. And really, that's just the beginning of the story for a lot of people. Um, it was hard working with some of the LSCWs in that, people would come in distress and screaming and yelling. And at times I would go over to the station and be like, hey, I can talk to this person. And, it was great. We'd go in there, we'd talk, we'd have good conversations, we'd be able to, bring people down in their level of distress. But at other times, I think they just kind of assumed like there was a limit on what we were able to do and didn't let us go in and would choose to go with a, much more traumatic um, type of care of, oh, we're just going to have like the nurses and security go down and, give them um, a shot to make them calm down because they're, too far distressed. Um, I remember one time I was working with this client. Um, and he was in a lot of mental health distress, but he was also using substances pretty heavily. Um, and I was real concerned about some of the things he was saying. And when I went and checked in with the licensed clinical social worker afterwards, they were just so dismissive of what I was trying to say. They just kept going, that's the meth. Like, that's just what meth does. It's just meth. And it's like, okay, as someone who's done drugs, like, no, that's not just the drugs there, but um it was frustrating to be shut that down at that in that way. And my brain wanted to just almost scream at this person like, I have like a master's in public health. I know like what I'm talking about. But then my brain kind of clicked and it was like, wait, is that me kind of buying into that? And I think that's one of the points where it really kind of clicked into me, that lived experience is just experience. And I don't know if there's better ways that we can, you know, talk about how or present our experiences as experience, but it really shapes us and it's extremely valuable to the people that um, we worked with as well. And when I'm saying I was dealing with discrimination, it wasn't necessarily outright. I don't think a lot of the peers I'd worked with noticed some of the things, but I definitely could tell. And a lot of it comes across, I think, as like microaggressions, the way in which people would talk to us, just the attitudes, how they said things. It wasn't necessarily outright, we think you're less than because you're a peer, but there was definitely some othering of us as peers. Um, That being said, there was this nurse who worked in the hospital, and she was wonderful, and she really believed in peer support and the work we were doing, and utilizing us and kind of building us up and giving us support, but also, teaching other doctors and nurses how to use peers as well. And it wasn't her job, like she didn't have to do that, but um, she did those things. So I think something important, as well is like, yes, finding ways to manage, the microaggressions, potential discrimination, issues that peers are going through, but finding the people who are really eager and willing to show up and celebrate the work and the people as well. So as a peer, not only did it just change, well, it helped gave me the skill set to work with the people I was working with, but it kind of became who I was. So, my relationships as a person were changing, but how I showed up for my coworkers as well. Learning to support them, what their triggers were, what they were going through, building the spaces so that we could talk about the things that were hard for us. This work is so incredibly hard. It's important to have the spaces and the people to really you know, build each other up and support each other in the work that we're doing. So learning how to kind of bridge these gaps, but then to support each other as we went. Um, I eventually left that position. And at the time, I didn't know it was going to be probably the most fulfilling job that I had, but it was hard because at the time they were paying $13 an hour, which was just not a livable wage. It was not something I could afford rent on. And being someone, with all this kind of college education debt as well, like I had to pay back, work to pay back that money. So I think it's really important, to another way to show people their worth is pay them what they're worth. But also when it wasn't busy in the hospital or in the emergency department and I didn't have people to talk to, I, checked in with my boss at the time and kind of asked him like, what are some of the things I can be doing, with this time? Like, how can I like be improving? And he just kind of was like, well, you could read the manual again. And it's like, okay, you can only read a training manual so many times. So I think it's really important to have ways to, continue learning and continue advancing in the field, not necessarily into something that's not a peer, but, more training for peers, different subject areas, maybe a peer one, two, three, a peer supervisor. Um, so honestly, I wish, I could be a peer and, sit and talk with people about their emotions and what was going on and try and help people all day. It was one of the most valuable experiences of my life. Um, I had moved after this position, I moved to Denver and I was a case manager, working with people getting into housing. But again, I still felt like I showed up as a peer to people when I could. And then I was like a case manager supervisor, and we eventually began bringing peers onto a lot of the different teams. Um, and I started seeing a lot of the same issues that I had personally experienced in this other organization. Um, I think we have a society where we have some like built-in biases of, you know, like, oh, I have a degree, so I know some more than someone without a degree, or I have a master's in social work or public health, so I know more than someone with an undergraduate degree or no degree. And there's just these levels of microaggressions um, that I was definitely seeing, and how hard it was for, you know, peers to come on into this space that was kind of new and undefined and be not only expected to do their job, but to figure out how to navigate that space as well. I did a lot of training in that uh, manager position. And so I was training a lot of people on how to use our electronic health records and kind of how to do social services. So I worked with a lot of peers. And I remember working with some peers and just being like, oh, so, you went through like the certification process. And they were just like, no, like we just started working here as peers and we're kind of just like thrown to the fire of go do the work as they, and eventually get certified, which was like, oh my gosh, what are we doing here? Um, so I immediately started trying to kind of like help and train peers at that organization as much as I could, but also really trying to build safe spaces for those individuals and a lot of the meetings we have, making sure there was space for peers. It was definitely hard, I think, for people to walk into a room with, a lot of licensed clinicians and directors and be like, I'm a peer and here's what I think. But I think that's so um, important for the work that we're all doing to see, the value in what peers bring, especially in this organization when a lot of their peers had, experience uh, with lived experience of experiencing homelessness and then, their pathway to find stable living, like they were the only people in the room potentially who could see both sides of what we were trying to do for our clients and what that real impact might actually be for the people and the things that we were trying to do and how we were trying to go about those things. Um, but I think through a lot of my experiences and working with people, I really came to believe, I think the most important thing, and I think it gets away from us sometimes, is it's not necessarily what you know, it's like who you are as a person. You aren't going to learn empathy or how to have an open worldview or how to be authentic or care about people. Like that's not going to come from a book. It's not going to come from a class. Like there's ways to enhance those things, but um, there's just, the people whose lives have led them to be those people. And I think that's the most important thing, I've worked with people who were just brilliant, brilliant individuals, but they didn't have the social skills or the way to connect with people. And, you know, clients would be like, oh, like I can't work with them. They don't get it. So I think that's extremely important. Um, and I think it's, peer support, it's been around, but sometimes a lot of companies and places are just eager to jump on the next hot buzzword. And I've seen that in a lot of different organizations and companies of like, oh, this is the new thing everyone's doing. Let's just do this. But I think very being intentional of the why. Why are we doing this? What do we have the space? Do we have the capacity? What does this actually look like? And building that out is extremely important as well. Uh, so, I mean, being a peer really changed my life. It changed how I presented to the world. It changed how I worked with others. And it challenged a lot of, the unconscious biases I definitely had, working with so many wonderful people in this field. I truly believe it's how we show up and who we are and how we become those people. Um, and I think we really need to work towards and find the ways to ensure that we're valuing um, the experiences and the humanities of others, and not just the people we work with, but um, we're so good at seeing the humanity and the value in our clients, but to make sure that we extend that to our coworkers as well, um, and that we're building safe places for everyone and the opportunity for everyone to grow and thrive. This work is extremely, extremely challenging. Um, And for, those of us who have been peers or are peers, a lot of us are the success stories. We are potentially the clients who made it through and we found a better way to be. And I think we need to continue to celebrate the wins and the people we work with, but also the people around us. And, find this culture of celebration where we give space and celebrate not only our clients, but each other. Um, so I thank you for your time and listening to me, and hope you continue pushing for peers to have the right space to flourish in the work that you do.